Hi, everybody. Welcome to our 38th episode of Lead Strong. Joined today by my wonderful co-host Steph and two lovely guests, Matt and Holly, who will introduce themselves shortly. My name is Celine Floyd. I am one of the directors of Catfinity's talent practice, an occupational psychologist, specialising in assessment of talent and leadership. And at Catfinity, we are a global business. We have offices in Birmingham, London, Dublin, various US locations and Sydney, and we've been helping organisations find candidates, develop employees and transform their organisation for well over 16 years. As I say, I'm joined as ever by my wonderful, looking very glamorous today co-host Steph, so love the necklace. Welcome.
I usually try and make half an effort for these episodes, but I think Celine's giving it away.
But you look particularly glam today.
Well, I think #casual is my middle name. That's why I look a little unusual today. But we're having dinner with a group of chief people officers tonight in London, so I have to run straight after this episode. So I thought, right, I'll get dressed before, you see. So there we go. Anyway, as Celine said, we're both directors of our talent practice at Catfinity. Delighted to be here today and thrilled to finally have this episode with Matt and Holly, which we've talked about for a while. And with the time zones that we've been dealing with, had to juggle around a little bit, but really thrilled to have you both with us. And what I'd love you both to do, if that's okay, is to introduce yourselves. Perhaps, Matt, we could start with you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and where you're based, because it's not as boring as London, and why you're passionate about the subject of leadership.
Sure. Thanks, Steph. So I'm based in Minnesota. I've been working in leadership development and HR for about the past 18 years, worked with IBM, 3M, and Thomson Reuters. I've always been in the space just kind of innovation and organizations that are going through transformation. And I've really been drawn to the topic of leadership, knowing what an impact it can make on us, whether we've probably all had really great leaders and some not so great leaders. And I know what that does for people day in and day out, as well as their family, their friends, and what an impact it has on their purpose and their sense of fulfillment. So this is a fun topic, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. And Holly, same questions to you. So just a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about the subject of leadership.
Yeah, so happy also to be joining you from Minnesota. So you'll hear the shared accent, the Minnesota accent that Matt and I both have in the middle of the US. And I have had a history of both HR and leadership development. So similar to Matt, that's where Matt and I actually connected for the first time, was at 3M. We shared an office wall for a little while. So we were close partners on work that we were doing within the organization. In my previous life to that, I spent a good chunk of time on the HR desk. So in the operations side, working from a generalist perspective. And one of the reasons that I bring myself into this idea of leadership, and I launched my own business actually, right at the end of COVID, sprung out on my own, was to really look at how do we bring the heart back into organizations. Having been on both sides of the desk, by that I mean the ops side and the leadership development side, I've had that opportunity to really see, to Matt's point, what happens when you have really effective leaders, what happens when you don't. And one of the things that we often talked about, and we still do to this day, is how do we make sure that we bring the human and the heart into our organizations? And I see leadership development as a key aspect to that.
Lovely, wonderful. We love a different accent, don't we, on these episodes? And so yeah, we're super excited to have you both across the pond join us today. So the topic, as Steph said, it's a topic and an episode that we have wanted to do for a little while. I feel like growth mindset is one of those things that when you discover it and you learn about it, it really sticks with you, doesn't it? And I am that person. I've just returned from holiday. I'm not usually so tanned, as Steph knows, and I am that person who will bore the poor holiday maker next to me talking about growth mindset and what it is and why it's important. So for those in the audience that perhaps aren't so familiar, growth mindset is really, isn't it, this notion of there are typically kind of two ways that people approach their lives and their careers, with a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And fixed mindset being seeing yourself as being constrained by the traits that you have, the intellect that you have, etc., and there being boundaries therefore to what you can achieve. And growth mindset being much more around swapping that in for not I can't do this, but I can't do this yet. So seeing things as being within your gift, and you being more than the sum of your traits or your intellects. And this was all spearheaded alongside others, but predominantly by a psychologist called Carol Dweck. And that research is all around being your best self, not about being better than others, and seeing failure as an opportunity, not as a condemnation, and the effort is the key to success. And there's been lots of research done about it in the past. And I think we've wanted to do this for a while because it's been kind of rearing its head again, especially during the pandemic and then post-pandemic, as a real point of interest for people within organisations generally. And there's been recent research, again by Dweck 2015, that I was just revisiting, showing that growth mindset isn't just about effort. So it's about trying new strategies and seeking input from others when we're stuck. And I'm just going to read two very quick excerpts, one from Dweck and one from the Corporate Leadership Council, which will just kind of give a bit of context. So the first from Dweck is, why hide deficiencies instead of overcoming them? Why seek out the tried and true instead of experiences that will stretch you? The passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even when it's not going well, is the hallmark of the growth mindset. This is the mindset that allows people to thrive during some of the most challenging times of their lives. And then another perspective, the Corporate Leadership Council, as I said, describes how a core component of learning agility involves venturing into unknown territory and putting oneself out there to try new things. Learning agile individuals are happy to volunteer for jobs and roles where success is not always guaranteed, and in fact, where failure is a very distinct possibility. So I guess that leads you to our first question, which is, in your experience, and I'll come back to Matt in the first instance to answer this. So Matt, in your experience of leading and working with other leaders, what does growth mindset look like in action, and how have you seen a growth mindset support leaders' development? I know that's two questions in one. I'm sorry, but yeah, hopefully that's clear. Yeah. What's your experience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the quotes that you read, because it is about stretching yourself. It's about the new opportunity, and growth mindset for me really gets at this idea of potential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the potential within all of us that we've got.
Right.
And to do that requires stepping into some spaces and doing some things that'll be really uncomfortable. And I think most people can relate to the idea of riding a bike for the first time. Right. And certainly you can relate to it if you're a parent and you have to then do this with your kid. I know I did with mine. I had kids end up running into fire hydrants, off over curbs into the middle of streets, right? And it can be a little terrifying and scary at times.
Yeah.
To do that for ourselves, but also
you have to teach the kids how to drive, because that's where I'm at, Matt.
That's where it's coming next, right?
This is, as a parent of a 5-year-old and a 2, this is petrifying. The thought of either of them driving is petrifying. Yeah.
You got it. And so this is really tough, not only for ourselves, but to do it with others, because inherently there will be some risk for ourselves and for them. And so this hallmark of a growth mindset leader is not to put people in situations that really are dangerous to them, right? Where they could end up being hurt, right? That sort of thing. But it's about finding those boundaries, and then within those boundaries, providing a safe space to test some things out and do some things that they wouldn't normally be able to do, develop some skills, knowledge, make some new connections, right? And what's really fun is when you see this done well, in some of the organizations I have worked in, you start to get this sense of uncommon connections, things coming together, people surprising each other and themselves as to what they can do and how they can work together. I know at 3M, we'd seen this a lot with their technologies, where they would connect these uncommon kind of platforms that they had. And it led to new discoveries like respirators, which was originally set up to be contracted as undergarments to our armed forces. And the only way that it happened were people kind of working with each other and with the materials and saying, hey, actually, there's a different use for this, something of value. But it took them to really stretch their minds and create the right environment for them to work this out and figure it out together. And so that's where I get excited about growth mindset, is this opportunity to not just be able to stretch ourselves and grow, but come up with some things that actually can change the world.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. And I loved in your description there around, acknowledging that it's going to feel unsafe, and just fronting that up, but also having boundaries around that. It's a balance. It's a balance, isn't it? Thank you, Matt. And Holly, does that echo with your own experience?
It does. It does. And I even was thinking about an experience. So I was thinking about it from like the individual leader standpoint, like how are they building and how do they create their own space to hear feedback, right? To learn, because I think Matt, we've talked about innovation quite a bit in terms of how does that impact the broader, right? How does it impact the world when you do that? And then how does it impact you as an individual? What do you need to do in order to be able to show up differently? So one of the things I often think about as we talk about this idea of growth mindset is, heaven help us, nothing is the same as it was 2 years ago. And I'm not even, take out the pandemic. That statement would still be the same.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so how as a leader do we need to drive this capability, this approach to how we lead, how we work with people, how we face challenges that we never know that are going to come our way? And nobody can have all of the information. I was with a group yesterday and we were just chatting about the volume of information that's available to these generations versus my own generation, and just what that means when you think about how you need to be open and how you need to recognize that you don't have all of the answers, nor should you. When you operate with this idea, right, what Carol Dweck talks about with being that humble and vulnerable to say you don't have the answers, how does that embody that growth mindset for people?
Yeah.
And that really then also helps to build what Matt was just talking about, the environment that lets people explore that together, because that's the way we show up with each other.
Yeah, and I love that link to innovation and to creativity, and that's definitely, that's been proven by research over the years and examples, hasn't it? And I love how you just described that you don't have all the answers, and nor should you. And I think it's that nor should you, which is key, isn't it? That empowering of a growth mindset, because if people don't believe in that nor should you, then that's where the blocker to the growth mindset is. Yeah.
Sure. Definitely. And I've seen it with leaders too, in terms of their own willingness to think about how do they change their own habits of communication with their team members. Right. So you think you know how to lead, and you think you have you've been leading for X number of years, and you're like, I've got this, right? Until you get feedback that you don't.
Yeah. And I love that one, Holly. It's this idea that things are always changing. I always thought of leadership, it's not a position or a title, but it comes in those moments where you're interacting with others. And those moments are always going to change. You and I could sit down and have this conversation tomorrow and the day after, and it would inevitably go somewhere else. There'd be something new to add to it. And that's sort of what being a leader is showing up and being present, focusing on others, and then figuring out what you need to do. And sometimes it's opposites.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's knowing when to speak up, and sometimes it's knowing just when to be quiet and listen. Right. And I think that's where the challenge of leadership is in that moment, where do I go?
Yeah.
Right. It's not a playbook. It's not a checklist. There are things that I could do that are total opposites. The only way I can figure that out is be right here, right now with these other people, bring kind of a positive mindset to this, right? Assume good intent, and then see the potential, which is where the growth mindset comes in.
There's so much ambiguity, isn't there, that people have to navigate now. And as you said, it's I also think it's not helpful that when you're probably it's when you're promoted for the very first time in your career into any sort of managerial or leadership position, you've got direct reports, you're often being rewarded for your knowledge. And I think that's a real constraint at that stage, because, you know, you basically have got recognition for knowing all the answers, and that can hold you back as you develop as a manager and a leader, can't it?
Absolutely, Steph, right? You think about that. Your mind at that point in time is, I've done this, I've got it, right? You've also, but this is the same with kids. And we've talked about this before with how this shows up with students as well, which is obviously Carol's original, you know, like I know her, Carol, Mrs.
We all feel like we know Carol.
But Steph, I think it's the same thing, right? We talk about this idea that, you know, when you are given that feedback and you're not given the support to do different, how does that push you back into a fixed mindset? How does that, you know, what are your triggers that put you back into that versus keeping you in that space where you're open and listening?
Excellent. Okay. So I guess we're all signed up to this as a good idea and you know, a good concept. And we know that it can help individuals to grow. But it's also, I guess, important to encourage team members to develop their own growth mindsets and to create a kind of true learning culture in an organisation. And I think most of us sign up to that. I can see we're all nodding. But the reality is that constant change, those ambiguous situations, the last minute pressures we're facing, it's very easy, isn't it, to default to putting a safe pair of hands on the project who knows how to do it, rather than let's give it to them. It will be a stretch assignment for them. So I'm really curious from both of you to understand, you know, how do leaders go about truly creating and sustaining a learning culture when there's pressure on to kind of deliver short-term results or deal with a crisis? Let me come to you first, Holly.
So one of the thoughts that I have around that, and some people are going to be like, really? But it's true, right? Is building in this practice of what I call pause and reflect. So I think about stuff when you describe that, it's like the blood started to go faster in my body because I could feel the pressure and the speed and the need to act and da-da-da-da. And if we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to call a timeout or to say, hold on, let's pause and reflect what's going on, we'll run into that cycle of just go, 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 go. And we do just go to the easiest resource. And by that, it's the person that we know the best, the person we think will handle it, whatever that case might be. And we don't change the narrative. We don't change the dynamic as to what's going on. So having the awareness to be able to say, I've got to build in those points, whether you call it milestones or whatever that might be, to pause and reflect and say, what are the things that I'm assuming here? And how do I find new data on this? Or who are the people that I might think that could learn from this opportunity? And then that's the other side of it, right? Part of that pause and reflect also has to be, what did we just learn from this experience? And not waiting until you're done to have that reflection period. But where are you reflecting in the middle of the day that you are going through these pressure points? What are you doing in order to make sure that you're taking time to ask yourself those questions in the moment? It's a hard practice. That's why I said people will be like, really? It's not like flip a switch and you can get it done. It takes work.
Yeah, those feedback loops and creating the space for them, I guess, as well, especially when the pressure's on. It's really hard.
Right.
Matt, what are your thoughts about, you know, creating this learning culture that we're all dreaming of?
Yeah. And Holly, I love it. The way you said immediately when you heard that setup, like you could feel the adrenaline kick in, like something changed physically in your body. Right? Yeah. I think this is so important just to recognize, like, we're wired in this way. I could feel it's like my amygdala kicked in there as the fight or flight. Yeah. Like, oh, what's the goal? What has to get done? Let's do it as quickly as possible and move on. Right? There was stress there for me. And I think part of this learning is being able to develop our brains to be able to step back. So I love the pause and reflect, because it's about how do you get out of operating with that amygdala, right? So the reptilian part of your brain. How do you get back to the prefrontal cortex where all the creativity is, all the innovation, all the things we need to access to actually be able to figure out how to navigate a new space, a new market, work with new customers, right? And so this can become a practice in many different ways for people.
Yeah.
right? Some people will find the pause and reflect work. Some people will get into meditation, right? Other people will start to practice gratitude, but there's different ways to approach this and start actually changing our brain and how it operates when under stress and under pressure, that'll better allow us to lean into it from a learning perspective. And that's really at the center of a lot of the good practices when it comes to figuring out how do I get better and improve myself at innovation and creativity, being a better colleague, creating more value for customers, right? And I think it's easily overlooked because it feels so basic at times. Sometimes we just like stop and take 3 deep breaths. Like sometimes that's all it is.
Right. I know. And the other one that you reminded me of, Matt, is the thing that we've also talked about, and we'll go, our shared history is the opportunity to also celebrate. So here's something that we notice, right? Mm-hmm. We often will pause and reflect when things do not go well. Mm-hmm. And that's great. That's part of learning. We absolutely need that. But hey, how about we pause and reflect or have some opportunity to celebrate when things went well? Because that's also learning.
Yeah.
It's also
such a good one.
Yes.
Right. And very often orgs will just be like, done. Great. We won. Let's go. Let's move on. That on to the next challenge. And we don't stop and reinforce for people what worked well, because that is also part of building your muscle to know when you're seeing different things. How does that help you recognize that trend? How does that, again, to Matt's point, do you notice what happened to you when you were doing things effectively? How does that show up in your body?
Yeah, and it has such an effect on people, doesn't it, that they then know that is a behaviour that needs to be repeated.
Exactly, Steph.
Being celebrated and recognised. It's not, it isn't rocket science, but it can be so hard to do and to remember to do, because as you said, most organisations go, well, let's just get one bigger. Let's just win a bigger one. Let's just do a bigger thing, because we did that little one there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been interesting to hear you both talk about it from a physiological perspective, because there's definitely something about how we are hardwired as humans, and we see that you only have to show someone a psychometric report about them or a leadership kind of report. And if I had a penny for every time that someone has gone, oh, these are all the greens, like I've got 9 greens, I'm just going to look at the red.
Yeah.
Or 1 red. And I'm like, why are you looking at them? Like, why are you looking? Yeah. So, that's that. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, need to celebrate more for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the other piece that's really interesting from a growth mindset perspective is the link to curiosity, because curiosity is kind of really coming through more and more in the research, isn't it, around being a huge part of having that growth mindset. And just very quickly before I start to close, Matt, any thoughts around the role of curiosity and how you can help leaders be curious?
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of research here around psychological safety.
Yeah.
Right. That's probably the biggest one there. And, a lot of this starts with getting to know others, being able to demonstrate that you care about them, right? And somehow trying to mitigate any fear that they may have of being rejected or feeling rejected, that there's some negative consequence to bringing up an idea that might be outlandish or sound a little crazy or that could never work. Right? The more you can do to eliminate some of those barriers as a leader, the more you'll get people leaning into that curiosity, throwing some things out there that they might otherwise not be willing to talk about or discuss or even bring up. And that'll really start to unlock curiosity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Holly, you were nodding there.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a piece that goes with perspective building, and I think that leads us to this idea of inclusion in terms of how do you recognize and how do you create those opportunities for perspective building, because that's where curiosity can really start to take shape when you have those safe spaces, as Matt was talking about, to open yourself up and say, hey, I don't know all of it, like I said at the top, but that means you got to reach out and you've got to start to understand what different might look like, or why somebody holds a different position or perspective than you do. And not from a sense of judgment. Not from a sense of judgment, which is the thing that we need to dispel in order to be able to get into curiosity. Let go of your preconceptions. Allow yourself to say, let me just really hear what this person has to say or this group has to say. That really fuels that flame of curiosity and allows you to build different pathways of understanding.
You're reminding Holly of some research I did years ago. It's fascinating. I think it can kind of rear from the back of your head, the memories. Years ago, I did research into cultural agility. So why some people are better able to relocate globally and work for the same company in another part of the world. Yeah. And the biggest thing that came through in the research was the difference between understanding difference in an open-minded way, but withholding and suspending judgment. So that was the biggest kind of differentiator. The people that could go, oh wow, that culture's different, it's not better or worse, it's just different, were so much more successful than the people who attributed a judgment to that difference. So fascinating. As always, we could talk about this all day. This is always half an hour is not long enough for these sessions, and it's been really fascinating. Thank you so much to you both and to Steph for your insights. Key takeaway moments for me from the conversation. Loved it when Matt opened likening growth mindset to riding a bike. I mean, he described how his children drove into a fire hydrant, but we didn't really dwell on that. But yeah, that notion of it being slightly dangerous when you're doing something new and outside of your comfort zone, great analogy. Holly mentioned, it's all around, people don't have all the answers, and nor should they. And we talked about the importance of that, nor should they, and actually recognizing that is key to having a growth mindset. We talked about the importance of pause and reflect, and that being really important for a learning culture, and reflecting on, we've got the right people on the job, what have we learned, but also what can we celebrate in this and in what's happened. And then most finally, talking about curiosity and the role of curiosity. And our very good friend psychological safety comes up in every episode, super important. So some really interesting content there, some great tips for the audience. As ever, I'll come to each of you for your final parting words. Holly, in the first instance, final reflections.
I guess my final parting words when I think about this, this is a lifelong skill. And I think there's always an opportunity to build upon. If you don't feel like you have it, what do you need to do to build it? It's going to do everybody well. And I just think how powerful it is when we think about the challenges that we're facing in the world, that if we can all get the world, my utopia would be everybody would operate with a growth mindset, because I think that would help a lot of us look at the world differently than we do today.
Absolutely. I'd love to be in that world. And Matt.
Yeah, ditto. For me, this is all about unleashing the potential within ourselves and each other, right? And I think about how the internal conditions have to be right within us for that to happen, and how the external conditions, psychological safety, can help support and accelerate that.
100%.
And if you put those two ingredients together, the growth mindset, psychological safety, it has the power really to change the world.
As does EQ. Can we add EQ in that, Matt?
Why not?
But 100%, I'm with you on that. So
Let's do it. It's definitely a lever, and it's another one of those accelerators. It is a skill we can develop, EQ, and the more we can better understand our own internal emotions and what's happening in our bodies, right? From that stress response to let's get into more state of comfort, and how we can help identify that in others and help them get to a place of creativity and innovation and out of that fight or flight response. All of that helps contribute to being able to make huge changes in the world and in ourselves.
Right. Perfect. Internal. Love it. And Steph.
I think we could call that the Minnesota Triangle, couldn't we?
Yeah.
That's my model on this episode. First time for everything. I can
see a PhD emerging from this.
So I was thinking about that quote, which just for me really helps me remember the growth mindset every day, which was Audrey Hepburn said, "Nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible."
Yeah.
So good old Audrey Hepburn, because I think that's something we can all take into our days.
I love it.
Love
Finish on Audrey. Well, that's the perfect finish. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our listeners. Back in a couple of weeks' time for our next episode. Yeah, lovely to see you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.